Welcome back. Pedram here with Larry Adkins talking about how media gets skewed. He's written a book on it. It's fascinating because how and where you consume your media is really going to be the tribe that you follow and the ideas that are reinforced in your mind. I know you're going to enjoy this one. I'll see you on the other side.
Interesting. They're doing some interesting stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's not easy. It's not easy being in media nowadays. So I'd love to get your background and just how you got into media and kind of what your pedigree is a little bit.
Sure. Started writing from my high school newspaper, college newspaper. I was wrote for my school paper. Went to law school, became a lawyer. Did legal research, involved a lot of writing, but I also became a freelance journalist. And I've been doing freelance journalism for approximately 25 years or so, writing for newspapers, magazines, radio, commentary. So yeah, I've always had an interest in writing.
Everyone assumes that there's bias in the media, but you've gone so far as to write a book on it. And so what started to kind of turn your mind on how crazy the bias was and how obnoxious it could get if one's not paying attention?
Yeah, I'd say talk radio in the early 90s, and then with Fox News and MSNBC, it became even more blatant. Then when I started teaching, that's one thing I left out. I've been a journalism professor at Temple University and Arcadia University and a couple other schools, and that's one of the topics that I like to focus on a lot, and it tends to interest the students. And so, yeah, it just has really, I'd say, gotten even more intense, I guess, over the last maybe 20 years or so.
It really has. So, what's happening? Like, are you seeing kind of like warring schools of thought? Is it becoming more just politicized, or is it corporate interests?
I'd say it's a little bit of both, but I'd say it's mostly politicized. I mean, people tend to go into their own corners, and the various media networks and websites. It's kind of as though we're living in parallel universes, and that, just the way events are portrayed. It's, you get let's say the Fox News version, you get the MSNBC version, and obviously with websites and online, that's the case as well. And so just people have a different narrative for various issues. It's not just politics. I mean, it's social issues, immigration, abortion, gun rights. So it's not just Democrat, Republican. It's just almost any controversial issue that you can think of.
So when a journalist wants to go out in the media, get a job, hang a shingle, do their thing, they understand that they're going to basically pick a side and write in a flavor, or is it more nuanced than that?
I'd say it's the type. It would all depend on the type of journalism and media outlet that you go to. And as I mentioned in the book, I do think that the straightforward mainstream media does get a little bit of a bad rap as quote unquote the liberal media. I think for the most part they do try to be straightforward, objective, although there's no such thing as perfect objectivity. So I think they try to be relatively straightforward. Again, it's not perfect, but then if you're going to work for a talk radio or for MSNBC or Fox News or let's say Salon, Salon.com, a liberal website, or theblaze.com, then you're going to have a clear bias and kind of an agenda in your reporting. So in answer to your question, I'd say it depends on the media outlet that the reporter works for.
Yeah, and so, it's scary. I listen to NPR driving in and out of work, and, I try to get my stuff on the internet. But it's really hard to know where the kind of influences that are behind the outlets that I'm reading or listening to come. Is there anyone in your opinion that is the least biased? Because you're saying that there's no way to be completely unbiased.
Right. I'd say, just from my own observations and what I think CNN tries to do a good job of being straightforward, not having too much of a bias, and to try to have equal panels of equal conservatives and liberals. C-SPAN, they're pretty much just straightforward, showing what goes on Congress, and they have different sides. So I think they're two, pretty good examples of that.
See, and NPR.
I'd say they're somewhat centrist. I know they get a bad rap amongst conservatives as being too liberal, but I think that generally they try to do really serious journalism and try not to be too. You're not going to see too many hosts, let's say like a Bill O'Reilly or a Rachel Maddow on NPR. I think they're more of a journalism style type hosts.
Yeah. So let's get into the belly of the beast. What is wrong with what we're seeing in the mainstream in terms of actual dissemination of real information?
As far as the mainstream media?
The skewed media.
Okay. You mean, I guess, the advocacy journalism type media. There's first of all, I am a fan of, both the mainstream media and, quote, advocacy journalism media. I'm liberal, so I watch MSNBC, but I also like to watch Fox News and get the opposing opinion. I like to go on the various conservative and liberal websites just to see to get various viewpoints. But I would say with advocacy journalism is that they're kind of reporting with an agenda, and they pick and choose the facts, they cherry pick. And it's sort of, if you're a watcher or viewer or listener or whatever, it's kind of hard to get a real, I guess, centrist type of opinion. Like if you want to really know the detailed facts of the Iran nuclear deal, something like that, you kind of know what you're getting if you go to MSNBC. You got, this is a Nixon goes to China moment. This is a great thing. And if you go to Fox News, it's Obama's Neville Chamberlain and selling out the United States and Israel, and this is going to lead to World War III. And I know that I'm kind of frustrated because I would really like to hear a balanced viewpoint as to, okay, what's good about the Iran nuclear deal and what's bad about the nuclear deal, and then let me decide. And just too often I see, I guess, stacked panels of experts that, kind of parrot the viewpoint of the conservative media or of the liberal viewpoint.
So isn't this a challenge, though? I mean, the founding fathers of this country really predicated our democracy on having an enlightened citizenry. So you should know the issues, you should know the facts, you should be able to weigh the facts and make an intelligent adult decision based on the information presented in front of you. And if your information only comes from a source that keeps feeding an opinion that reinforces kind of a gestalt, then doesn't that basically allow the media and the spinsters to kind of direct the minds of men in a way that might be dangerous for democracy?
Absolutely. It becomes an echo chamber. And if one host or network or website operator decides on a certain narrative, that their viewers, listeners are likely going to believe that. And oftentimes people live in their own echo chambers, and so they only watch Fox News. They only listen to talk radio, one side, and then let's say liberals only watch MSNBC, only read the New York Times editorial page, and for the most part, and it's also Facebook and Twitter and getting like-minded information from other people, and you're just a lot of times people aren't exposing themselves to different points of view.
Yep. And you see this not just here. I mean, we've obviously got a polarized society. I mean, either you're red or you're blue, and it's become a very tragic situation where the discourse is gone, and people don't feel like they're Americans. There's just different camps, and that kind of dialogue. The gray is where the good stuff happens. But we're also seeing this maybe with potentially Al Jazeera and some of the kind of international networks, because now the Middle East is splashing up on our beaches. Now, problems in Africa are. And so there are very different stories and narratives that you're seeing internationally that Americans just don't even have access to some of that information, do we?
Right. And I guess I was disappointed, and I don't know about you, but my cable dropped Al Jazeera, and I'm not sure of this. I don't think their network is on in America anymore. I'm not positive about that, but I know my cable outlet drop them. The BBC is very good for international news. CNN International is very good for international news. But generally, unless there's a major crisis, terrorism bombing or things like that, or major earthquake, for the most part, unless U.S. interests are involved, it's going to be ignored. And that's especially the case in Africa and South America. And I think one of the better examples is the Captain Phillips Somalia incident, where, ships around the world had been hijacked for years off the coast of Somalia, and that basically got no coverage in the United States. But when it was a United States ship that got hijacked, then it got 24/7 coverage. And so, yeah, generally the United States media tends to ignore what's going around in the rest of the world.
So is this a chicken and egg argument, though? Is it because Americans just don't care about anything that doesn't apply to them, or is it more nuanced in terms of feeding information that is kind of U.S.-centric?
Yeah, I think it's U.S.-centric, and I think most of it is an economic decision by the networks, meaning that what do our viewers, what do our readers care about? And, are they going to care more about, Justin Bieber being arrested for DUI? Are they going to care more about declining Guatemalan copper mining? Even if it's a big, crisis in, a foreign country, that isn't an earthquake, people do tend to, they like sensationalist stories. They like to choose stories that they think people will be interested in.
How much of this is Hearst's legacy? How much of this is kind of the turning of the direction of what journalism, was traditionally known as, and now what, is obviously leading to advocacy in multiple directions?
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess in a way we've kind of gone full circle. At the beginning, like colonial period, especially right around 1800, that it was mostly advocacy journalism, in that the political parties formed their own newspapers, and they were clearly not objective and balanced, and they would insult the other candidate, and it would be personal, and it was very clearly agenda driven. But then you had what was called the emergence of the penny press, which was geared toward the common person, and they started doing other stories. They focused a lot on crime, and then you had the inverted pyramid, which was kind of like straightforward news without a bias, and corporate ownership, and kind of a lot of centrist positions. But then, like you mentioned with Hearst and Pulitzer, they got into the war as far as creating the Spanish-American War, as far as sensationalism, yellow journalism, and just kind of, really trying to sensationalize stories to get more people to buy newspapers. And we've had different eras as well. We had the muckraking era of the early 1900s, which was kind of advocacy journalism. Then it got to be a lot more straightforward. But then I'd say with the rise of talk radio, and then Fox News, MSNBC, and websites as well, we started getting more back to advocacy journalism.
Yes, so I know in the web domain, it's all about clickbait. It's all about drawing people onto your page because that's what drives advertising dollars. And a lot of times the stuff that people are clicking on isn't even true. It doesn't matter. They're headlines with flashy images, and it's really distorted kind of the traffic of the internet towards, a race to the bottom. And how much of that is just driven by market dynamics versus some of the advocacy channels that you'd see in traditional media?
Sure. It's a lot of it is headline driven. Just from the tabloids and from, online, the stories that they want to emphasize, they'll have the bolder headlines and maybe a short subhead to get people to click on them. And they'll emphasize the more sensational stories that they think there will be more reader interest.
Is there an issue with our attention span, in your opinion? Everyone's saying that we're less likely to pay attention than a goldfish at this point, and having an intelligent conversation seems like who the hell's got time for that? So is that also kind of a mark of where you see journalism going?
Yeah, I know I see some free newspapers kind of around Philadelphia area, the city, and a lot of times you sort of get like a Cliff Notes version of the news that just doesn't go into a lot of detail. I know a lot of my students would rely on, let's say, a Jon Stewart or a Stephen Colbert to get their news, or watch, Jimmy Fallon, or, just Facebook and Twitter. And, if they're, Aunt Jane sends them an article to read on Twitter or Facebook, that's kind of where they get their news. And we're bombarded with information and people are very busy. So it is kind of hard to be to read 7 newspapers from front to back, constantly, or, to watch the nightly news and all the news shows. And so people, just generally, I guess, don't have a lot of time for it.
And you got to trust your source. So, traditionally, you figure there's so much information out there in a market economy. You have someone who sits in a position where they aggregate that information and kind of draw a synopsis and kind of an informed opinion. Hopefully it's neutral, and then just, boils it down for you, because who the hell's got time to read all that? But if the media, according to your thesis, is so skewed, then you have to understand that it's always kind of driving towards, a political agenda or something like that. So, let's talk about the dangers of that.
Well, I'd say the danger isn't with all the media. Like I said, I guess, and it's not a perfect thing, but I do think that the major newspapers and your local TV or NBC, ABC, CBS do try to do a relatively straightforward balance, giving both sides. The announcer has a neutral tone. They're not calling Obama a socialist. They're not calling Bush a moron. They're just basically presenting the news, and you have that. But then, referring to your question, you do have an even more, probably now, advocacy journalism outlets, and where there is a clear bias and a skew as far as, reporters having an agenda as to what narratives they want to drive, as far as Obamacare being horrible or the Affordable Care Act being great. And again, they're going to cherry pick facts and have guests that are going to support their viewpoint. And so I think there are places where you can get kind of like the unbiased, straightforward news. Again, not perfect, no such thing as perfect objectivity, but I do hope that those straightforward outlets do continue and don't get enticed to, I wouldn't want ABC to try to become Fox News or MSNBC. I would hope that they would see themselves as kind of like the neutral arbiter of presenting, a balanced picture, so that does still exist.
Yeah, that's something that we need as a culture. Speaking of culture, there's this emerging culture that is kind of riding in like a Mongol horde and really taking a lot of people by surprise. I think we need to talk about Trump. You can't not talk about Trump and what he's doing with the media and how he's playing it, because he is a phenomenon, and a lot of people hate him, a lot of people love him. What's your opinion of what he's doing with media and how he's using it?
He clearly has used it very well. He didn't spend the money that the other Republican candidates did, because I guess he was so compelling, whether you liked him or didn't. But he was just entertaining to watch. He was different. He spoke his mind. He was polarizing. And the debate ratings were higher with him in it. And he just basically sucked all the oxygen out of the room for the other candidates, meaning that, with the 16 other candidates might just barely get a mention. Meanwhile, every single Trump speech was being shown, and that's still the case now. And so he it's like a love-hate relationship that Trump has with the media. On one hand, arguably they helped create him because of all the attention that he got. On the other hand, especially lately, he doesn't like the coverage that he's getting, and he's kind of falling into the traditional Republican mantra of the liberal, mainstream media. They're out to get me. And so it's interesting to see that dynamic on how the media's been both favorable to him and arguably unfavorable.
And so how much of this is people are just so tired of hearing the rote measured political jargon that no one seems to care for or understand, and we all kind of nod off when politicians do their thing, right? Yes. Versus a guy that's kind of shooting from the hip. And so are Americans sparking to some dialogue that is at least honest, or are there channels that are also kind of favoring him as kind of an opposition, or putting him up as their horse? I hear both of these types of dialogues going on simultaneously.
Right. I mean, I agree. I think it's both. Maybe Fox News resisted it first, but I think that most of them are coming around to really favor him. And talk radio, for the most part, I think favors him. And just generally, I guess the Republicans generally are coming around to favor him. So I would say that, there's a little bit of that.
Yeah. So where do you think this is going? Like, what's the future of media, and how does a person who cares to be informed need to look at media?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question. And obviously, as I know from my college students, newspapers are unfortunately maybe an endangered species, and that possibly the print version may be gone for a lot of them in, let's say, 20 years. And I mean, constant staff cutbacks. And I mean, I'm a clear fan of newspapers. For the most part, nobody else is going out to covering the school board meetings, the zoning board meetings, traveling with your local team, local sports teams to get that insight. And I really hope that newspapers can stick around, because the depth and insight that they provide, I think, are very valuable. And I just worry that they're just not going to be around as much. And also, I mean, for as much as people like to, and don't get me wrong, I love the websites, I love blogging and Twitter and the strong voice and all that, but they still rely strongly on the mainstream media to report stories. And just then it's the bloggers commenting on what the mainstream media is reporting. So I really hope that we still have the mainstream media around to do that, in-depth reporting with large newsrooms and large budgets, and investigative reporting to delve into really serious issues.
There's Reuters, there's a couple of the other kind of big hallmark ones that a lot of the bloggers and people will kind of draw from the traditional journalism hubs. What about those? Like, where's Reuters in this?
Yeah, they're, I'd say, a credible source, and probably should have mentioned them earlier. Associated Press, I'd say, is another one. And just generally, and they go back, to not Reuters, but the AP, Associated Press, goes back to the 1800s as far as straightforward reporting, and they have the AP Style book, and I would put Reuters very high as far as credibility and trying to get things right.
Got it. Great. That's good to hear. It's good to hear that there's a bastion of stability in journalism that is still fighting for the art and science of telling an objective story. What does this say? There's a line, I can't remember who the hell said this, but it's like the battle for the future is the battle for the minds of men, right? And so a lot of this kind of propaganda warfare that comes with just kind of controlling a narrative and really helping drive people's sentiment in a direction that kind of leads to power and all that. Where do you see some of the challenges with media and how some of these skewed outlets are driving the global conversation?
Yeah, I mean, their influence is enormous as far as like talking points or buzz phrases, or painting a certain narrative of a candidate. Obama's aloof, Bush is an idiot. Trump is polarizing. Kerry was aloof. Mitt Romney was an elitist, and the various media outlets would enforce that narrative, and just generally the viewers of that skewed outlet tend to buy it. And I mean, probably nobody is as influential as Rush Limbaugh over, let's say, the last 25 years. And I mean, his buzz phrases of, the drive-by media, and I mean, Pocahontas with Elizabeth Warren, that, I think he was the first one with that. And that became, common for people to use those words, that people just kind of buy into, and if Rush Limbaugh, if talk radio turns on a certain politician or a candidate, they're likely to get primaried, and I guess that happened to Eric Cantor of Virginia, and that happened a lot with the Tea Party. That if you alienate your base or alienate talk radio or influential commentators, that can hurt you politically, and that has helped lead to the polarization, that there just aren't as many moderates, and that goes for both sides. I mean, just generally Congress, and gendermandering has been a big part of it, but I think the polarized media has been a big part of it as well.
It sounds like talk radio is a place where a lot of the stuff festers. I know that even like conspiracy guys like Art Bell and George Norrie. I mean, these people have tens of millions of listeners talking about alien conspiracies, and so it's just people are picking their narrative and they're sticking to it, and that seems like a challenging place where we have a country where ideas are supposed to meet in the middle, but if you can't get the other side's opinion, what does that do to who you are?
Yeah, and there was one incident that really bothered me in one of my classes where a student was absolutely convinced that the Sandy Hook shooting was either a government conspiracy, and the government actually hired the parents as crisis actors, and that it didn't happen. And I mean, he genuinely believed it. And I guess ironically, one of the other students in my class just shouted him down and said, "No, I know people who are the parents in Sandy Hook and know that really did happen." And I looked it up and looked on Snopes and other kind of like fact-checking organizations, and found out that there was this conspiracy theory out there that the Sandy Hook shooting never happened and it wasn't real and it was created by the government. And you just see all kinds of, some Twitter rumors are relatively harmless. And I remember students in the class saying, "Oh, Justin Bieber just got punched out by Blake Griffin in a bar," and everybody believed it. And it was a wild Twitter rumor, turned out to be false. But there were times when Twitter got hacked and said that President Obama had been assassinated, or a Twitter reporting at first that Gabby Giffords had been dead in the Tucson shooting. And so just because people want information instantaneously, a lot of times rumors spread and hoaxes spread, and just generally false info, not all the time, but a lot of times false rumors can spread.
Yeah, it's dangerous. I see things like that on Facebook. There were the new pope, the people's pope. There are so many memes with quotes of his face. They have pictures of his face with quotes that this man has never said, that people share like crazy, because it doesn't matter. The Pope said it. It must have moral authority.
Yeah. And I mean, just generally, it's going to play to the audience. I mean, I guess a lot of conservatives don't like the Pope. I mean, another example I mentioned in the book that I wasn't aware of till, I guess, a friend of mine told me something like there was this, Obama and Rahm Emanuel in a gay bathhouse in Chicago. And that evidently that was on a conservative website. And that spread like wildfire in conservative media, and to the point where it's commonly believed by a lot of conservatives. And and I mean the whole Bush 9/11 conspiracies, that I guess that it wasn't the planes that brought down the towers, that the government had controlled explosions. I mean, there's just all kinds of conspiracies out there from both sides. That just the hatred for the other side's president is so strong now that they'll almost believe anything about the other side.
That's not very helpful, is it? It doesn't lead to a civil society where discourse is at the center of kind of a progressive conversation about how we can coexist together, right? No matter what side of the fence you're on.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I guess I like about CNN. And actually, I have seen MSNBC improving a little bit on this as far as having balanced panels. MSNBC maybe about a year ago, you would see either 4 liberal guests agreeing with the host or 3 liberal guests with 1 token conservative. Now there may be a little bit more balance, but I think CNN, and they have like panels of 6 experts now, and generally they do try to have a pretty good balance, so at least you're getting various perspectives.
Yeah, it's nice to see it coming back. But I remember CNN during the first Gulf War was just like, guns blazing, like, check out what we're doing. It was kind of like, they got like exclusive rights to cover the Gulf War, and it was this thing, right? And now they've kind of turned, and things shift. So just because CNN is good today doesn't mean they stay good tomorrow, depending on an acquisition or shareholder decisions or whatever it is. So I think the moral of the story is, be a critical thinker, which is in your kind of tagline of the book. So the book's called Skewed: A Critical Thinker's Guide to Media Bias. This is really, I have an early version of it here, so I'm assuming it'll continue. It looks like this. Fantastic stuff. I really applaud you on taking this step and really bringing this to light. Where can people find the book?
It is available on BarnesandNoble.com, your local bookstore, Amazon.com, all of the various websites that with booksellers. But your local bookstore should have it. If not, you can order it through your local bookstore.
Great. Larry, thank you so much. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and keep it up. With the journalism.
Right. Thank you very much.
Interesting stuff. It's really important to get our information from pure sources. What is a pure source? It's difficult, and so this is why media controls a lot of things. This is why politics gets really complicated. So let me know what you thought about this one. Next week, Sarah Al-Yafi, who is trying to turn garbage into energy in Lebanon. Some fascinating stuff happening on the front lines of a country that doesn't have room for trash. If you missed some of the episodes from the last few weeks, I got some over here on my side, and always you can subscribe in this button below me if you're watching. If you're listening, go to the subscribe feed. And if you're watching this on thewell.org or the Urban Monk blog, let me know what you think. I'm doing this for you. I'll see you next week.